Hey everyone, welcome back to Engelbard. Last week I showed you my review of Metroid Dread, the latest in the long-running 2D Metroid series that started all the way back in 1986 with the release of the original Metroid for the NES, or technically at that point, the Famicom. What did I think of Metroid Dread? Well, it's pretty great. If you want to see my detailed review on it, you can click the link up there somewhere, and it'll also be down below in the description. After making my way through Metroid Dread a few times, I had a thought. I thought, hey, it'd be pretty cool to show my ranking of all the official 2D Metroid releases, from the original all the way up through Dread. Then I had a whole bunch of other thoughts. Then I decided, screw it, I'm just going to go ahead and do my Metroid ranking video anyway. So, here it is. Now I'm only going to consider the mainline 2D Metroid releases from Nintendo themselves for this. So the games that are going to be in this ranking include Metroid, Metroid II: Return of Samus, Super Metroid, Metroid Fusion, Metroid Zero Mission, Metroid Samus Returns, and finally Metroid Dread. Since only official games are included in this list, I'm not going to include any ROM hacks that add new gameplay elements or functionality to the older titles in the Metroid series. Yeah, I know they're out there, I know what they do, and yeah, they're pretty cool for the most part. I'm also not going to be able to include any homebrew releases, which excludes the absolutely excellent AM2R, or another Metroid 2 remake. That game is utterly fantastic, but it's not an official Nintendo release, so it doesn't make this list. Alright, so now that you know what's going to be in here and what's not, let's go ahead and get on with it already. Leaping and spinning into 7th place on this list is the original version of Metroid II on the Game Boy. It's aged the worst of the bunch. It's still a really good game at its core, but Samus's lone Game Boy outing is kind of a weird one in the context of the whole series. It's less about exploration and more about, well, committing genocide. Samus is there to kill all the Metroids and wipe them out of existence. Because hey, that's what heroes do. This game limits exploration by locking you into finite areas until you kill a set number of mutated Metroids. Then, the next area unlocks and you move on, rarely having to go backwards for any reason. It was definitely a different approach to what Metroid should be from the first title. It's still interesting and fun, but it isn't as compelling as the other games in the series. Metroid 2 adds some new moves and items into the mix that would become series staples, like the space jump. You can also now duck and shoot down while jumping. The control is a lot more forgiving than it was in the first game. We also get some items that basically stayed in this game alone, like the pretty cool but slow spider ball that lets you roll along walls and ceilings. Oh, and this game changed the item pickup jingle from the original title, and the jingle from this game became the standard one for all future games in the series. If you like the jingle from the first game better, Nintendo says, "F*** you, you get this one now." Metroid II: Return of Samus would ordinarily be on a little puke green Game Boy screen with super blurry motion, but I'm showing it to you blown up to full size and in black and white. Why? Because I care about you that much. Even those of you watching who still haven't subscribed for some reason. Which, hey, why not do that? All things considered, Metroid 2 should be viewed at a safe distance from behind glass in a museum, for it makes a much better piece of history than an engaging Metroid game. It's really not bad, but it is archaic, and anyone not already familiar with it will probably find it frustrating. It's also been thoroughly supplanted by the 3DS update Samus Returns, and even the excellent homebrew title I mentioned in the intro, AM2R. Bombing the nondescript block that leads into 6th place is the game that started it all, the original Metroid. Man, I love this game when it was new. The sci-fi vibe, the alien feel of the worlds, all the power-ups to find, the abilities to unlock, it all felt so new and fresh when it came out. It's easy to see why this game helped launch an entire genre. Much like with Metroid 2, there's no in-game map, and many of its long horizontal and vertical corridors are indistinct. Yeah, at least we have color in this original release to help differentiate areas a bit, but the game's giant maze isn't particularly friendly to modern gamers. Don't get me wrong, Metroid on NES is not insurmountable. In fact, it's very surmountable, assuming that's a word, but there are no modern conveniences here. There are no hints, you never know where you have to go next, you don't know which item you need to get on with the game, or what you should do in general. Sometimes you have to bomb blocks that look just like every other block to progress. This is old school gaming at its old schooliest. Is Metroid worth playing today? Sure, I guess, but the best way to experience the original Metroid these days is to play the much friendlier and more advanced Metroid Zero Mission. NES Metroid has cemented its place in history as one of the progenitors of the entire Metroidvania genre. It's interesting to play it now and see how far we've come since its initial release, but modern gamers who didn't grow up with it may find it tough to enjoy. But hey, you've got to appreciate the game that brought us the Screw Attack. Blowing open the red door to 5th place with a standard missile is Samus Returns on 3DS. It was really tough to pick between this game and the next one for 5th place, because they're both actually very even. And from this point on, all the games are pretty great and hold up well today. I mean, I love the original Metroid and Metroid II back when they were new, but there's no question that they've aged like fine milk. As you might have guessed, Metroid Samus Returns on 3DS is a remake of Metroid II Return of Samus on the Game Boy. Pretty fitting that it ended up on a portable system, isn't it? Anyway, this was the first of the 2D gameplay Metroid titles to use polygonal graphics. It was also the first 2D plain Metroid title that was developed by outside studio Mercury Steam. How'd they do? Well, pretty damn good. Samus Returns takes the original Metroid 2 and goes about fixing many of its problems. We have a detailed map that's always on the second screen now. We have teleporters for fast travel, there are more items and more moves, combat is more intense thanks to the melee counter and 360-degree aiming, and you can do lots of backtracking if you want to get 100% of the items. Mercury Steam did a great job of cleaning up the original Metroid 2, and everything about this game is better than that game, except for maybe one little thing. This is the only 2D Metroid game that runs at less than 60 frames per second. It's only a 30 frames per second game. I'll add some of the physics feel just a smidge off here too. Nothing crucial, it still plays great, but it is noticeable. And I will note that I'm showing a cleaned up version of this game running at a higher resolution than the original to spare you the horror of all of the evil jaggies that you'd normally see. You're welcome. But it kind of makes you want a nicer looking Switch remake of this game, doesn't it? Anyway, Samus Returns is a great remake of the original and shows how to do a remake right. Next up, dropping a powerbomb to open the door to 4th place and just edging out Samus Returns, is Metroid Fusion. These two games are very different in a lot of ways, and Fusion overall actually has more flaws. But there are also some things about it that I feel are a little more rewarding, and it advances the Metroid lore in a way that Samus Returns doesn't. Metroid Fusion continues the story of Super Metroid. It was the first real new entry in the 2D series in about a decade at the time that it came out. Fusion is also a really good game and it does a lot of things right, but it also does a few things pretty wrong. This game is broken up almost into levels, sort of similar to Metroid II, except that here the areas, while they're pretty self-contained, are connected by a hub. There's a little backtracking, but less than the original Metroid or Super Metroid. Later on, towards the end of the game, you can move about more freely between areas, but, at that point the game's almost over. Still, there are some clever puzzles here to figure out, and it'll take some real effort to collect 100% of the items. One thing I will note here is that if you wait too long and accidentally advance the plot too much, well, the game literally locks you into the endgame long before it should, sealing off a whole bunch of the areas and making it impossible to go back and explore and collect the items you missed or just couldn't get to earlier. Another problem with this game is that it completely holds your hand throughout most of the adventure, telling you exactly where you have to go and what to do. And this game is just way too chatty. What Fusion does right is the control. It's much more streamlined than the overly complex controls of Super Metroid. The GBA only had 2 action buttons and 2 shoulder buttons. Out of this limitation was born a much better control scheme that just felt fantastic and intuitive. Holding R and pressing fire for missiles, that came from this game. So did automatically running. On the downside, they took out the infinite bomb jump and also made wall jumping way less useful. Fusion also throws a few new items into the mix that would appear again later in the series. It's a game that has flashes of brilliance stirred up in a big heaping cup of why did they do that? When all is said and done, Fusion is a great game overall, but it may turn off some of the Metroid faithful or those who like more open-ended games. This one is notoriously difficult to sequence break, and the times that you can do it often require you to use glitches rather than clever or skillful gameplay. Now, Metroid Fusion is absolutely worth playing. It just doesn't quite measure up to the games that are above it on this list. Samus's latest 2D adventure, Space, jumps into the number 3 spot on my list. Metroid Dread is a great return to form for our favorite space bounty hunter. We have more freedom than we did in Metroid Fusion, which was the last new entry in the series before this game, and Dread is extremely polished and a joy to play. It's easy to be super hyped about Dread because it's so new and there was so much pent-up demand for it. But I think if you take a step back and look at it compared to the other games in the series, you'll see that it does have some flaws that keep it firmly below the top 2 games in this list. The Emmys, well, I found they kind of slowed the game down and were more frustrating to deal with than interesting or fun. Also, despite all the years between Fusion and this game, it doesn't really add much to the formula at all. It's almost more like a greatest hits album, and I do think the controls are a little more complicated in this game than they need to be. Now, we do get the combat from Samus Returns, and it's refined a little here, but there are hardly any new items to get, and the ones that are here, well, there are hardly any times you ever have to use them or get to use them, with the exception of one that the impatient among us will use all the time. Dread also goes super happy with these blocks that are embedded into walls that you have to destroy in order to modify the environment, which is often required to go on, and it can be easy to miss them in a few places, which did happen to me on my first time through, and apparently happened to a certain famous game developer. Now, unlike him though, I don't think that they ruined the game, but calling a little more attention to them would have definitely helped out a bit. Visually, Metroid Dread is a gorgeous game, aside from a few areas here and there that look a little plain. It's easily the best looking of the 2D series, and it runs, aside from the cutscenes and super rare drops, at 60 frames per second, giving it a much more pleasant appearance than Samus Returns. While Dread does give you a little more freedom than Fusion, as I mentioned a moment ago, it still doesn't give you the same degree of freedom as the 2 games that are above it on this list. Yeah, I've seen the speedruns of this game where people finish it in about 90 minutes, and most of that is thanks to glitches that may be patched out in the game at any time. It wouldn't be the first time Nintendo did this to a game post-launch. Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition. Anyway, Metroid Dread is an absolutely great game. Don't let its 3rd place finish fool you into thinking that I don't like it or something. I gave the game a 9 out of 10 when I reviewed it. What more do you want? Jeez. But yeah, if you want to see all the reasons I didn't score it higher than a 9, which consequently helped lead it to its 3rd place finish here, check out my review linked above somewhere in that card again or down in the description. Shine sparking into 2nd place on my list, we have Super Metroid. Ah, Super Metroid. Many consider this to be the crown jewel of the series. The cream of the crop, you get the idea. So why did I put it at number 2? Is it because I hate you or just want to be different? No, hear me out on this one. You may not agree, but at least you'll understand where I'm coming from. Super Metroid is an absolute classic. There's no shame in it getting the number 2 spot here. If you haven't played this game, I wholeheartedly recommend it to anyone. It refined the gameplay elements of the first 2 games, it ratcheted up the graphics quality a lot, it added the map, it added extremely moody music, memorable boss encounters, an intriguing labyrinth to deal with, and quite a lot of freedom to figure out your own way and to do things differently than the developers intended. Watch some speedruns of this game if you haven't seen them before, and you'll be shocked at some of the things you see. Why don't I consider it the absolute pinnacle of 2D Metroid then? Well, for a few reasons. Much like the newest release, I feel the controls are a tad unwieldy in this game. Unlike Metroid Dread, however, you can change most of the button assignments directly from the game here, thankfully. And you can also tweak a few other minor options like allowing moonwalking or backward stepping. But no matter how you customize them, the controls are a tad clunky in this game. And the moody music that I mentioned? Yeah, it fits the game, but a lot of it is just kind of there rather than actually good. Which is kind of funny, because that's a complaint leveled by a lot of reviewers about Metroid Dread, but personally I think Dread has a much better soundtrack than Super Metroid. And while Super Metroid's idiosyncrasies make it great for speedrunning, a lot of the glitches that speedrunners in this game employ are the result of the devs just being a little bit sloppy at times. Knockback when being hit can be sort of, well, strange, and sometimes just general weird things happen. The kind of things you would tell your friends about when the game was new, and they wouldn't believe you. They would insist that you show it to them, and then when you try to show it to them, the glitch doesn't ever work the same way again, and then they call you a liar. And if you want to find everything, you can pick up the optional X-ray visor. But the X-ray visor in this game is really slow and cumbersome, and the equivalent abilities you get in later games are done much better. The new items added to this game, like the super missiles and power bombs, they're really just new keys for new locks. The grapple beam is probably the most interesting and significant new item, and it becomes irrelevant after you get the space jump. And in fact, if you're creative and skillful enough, you don't need to get the grapple beam at all. My complaints about Super Metroid are really very minor in the scheme of things. They're more annoyances than anything else. It's undoubtedly one of the greatest games the genre has ever seen, and an inspiration to so many modern games. Super Metroid is undeniably a classic must-play game. It just got slightly beaten out by my favorite 2D Metroid title, which is... Rolling down a skinny little pipe and dropping into first place, we have Metroid Zero Mission, Samus's second GBA outing, which is a ground-up remake of the original Metroid with a healthy dose of new stuff thrown into the mix. Metroid Zero Mission, more than any other game on this list, just strikes me as a game made with absolute confidence and care. Everything about its presentation is absolutely top-notch. It looks fantastic, it sounds great, it adds new moves and items that weren't present in the original, and adds a sizable brand new area with new gameplay elements. The streamlined controls from Metroid Fusion find their way into this game, only this time the control feels even better and more responsive. It doesn't have any of the weird physics of Super Metroid, and there's basically nothing that slows this game down once it gets going, at least not until near the end. Is Zero Mission the perfect Metroid game? Well, not quite. It does hold your hand a little too much, similar in some ways to Fusion, but it doesn't do it nearly as bad as that game. And the last section of the game throws you for a loop by placing Samus into a situation where she has none of her abilities and has to rely on stealth. It's only temporary, but it's probably the thing about this particular game that is the most divisive. Now personally, I think at the end of the game, when you're basically done exploring, I really like this area. Yeah, you get one more power-up here, and then you can travel back to prior areas to pick up the things you missed, but you don't have to get any of that stuff. If you're not going for 100%, you can just go right on to the end of the game here. Metroid Zero Mission just does so much so right. It looks better than the other completely 2D entries in the series. It has my favorite Metroid soundtrack, it has some of the most interesting and difficult puzzles of the 2D games, and it even allows you to really sequence break if you have the skill for it. You can grab the Varia suit basically right near the beginning of the game if you're good enough. Which, hey, I did that here so you can see just how. Metroid Zero Mission is the absolute best way to experience Samus's first outing. None of the 2D Metroid games are perfect, but in my opinion, Zero Mission comes the closest. It just screams quality from start to finish, and I can't recommend this game enough. Alright, so there you have it, my ranking of all of the official 2D Metroid games released by Nintendo. Now this was my own personal list. Your list will probably be different than mine, and that's alright, we're allowed to disagree on things. You'll have your reasons for your list, and I gave you my reasons for mine. But the point is, there are no bad 2D Metroid games. They're all really good to really great. It's just a matter of how great is each game on this list. And that'll do it for this video, my retro gaming friends. If you enjoyed the video, hey, go ahead and toss it a like and share it online. If you haven't yet, go ahead and subscribe too, and while you're at it, hit that notification bell so you'll know as soon as more retro gaming goodness is available. With that, I'll say thanks for watching, and see me later.